Please take a seat, grab a beverage, pizza, what have you. If there's not enough seats, there's still some hanging in the back.
Plenty of seats in the front, don't be shy.
I sent it to you on Slack. You want to see it? I'll show it.
Bear with us, we're experiencing minor technical difficulties because someone unplugged all the speakers and the microphones and we didn't know.
Wait, we don't have speakers for tonight?
Yeah, no, all the speakers canceled.
Wow, yeah.
Awesome! Welcome to DenverScript! Show of hands, who's a newbie?
Nice.
Yeah, still got people to come back. Right. Did a live recording start?
Yes, and that's the headphone. And the audio's working.
All right, these things are not possible without sponsors, or else you won't get a venue, speakers, food, booze. Code Talent is the venue that you're in currently. If you're in the job market or you need to hire someone, please talk to them. They're very good people, and they do attract some really awesome talent, so please give them a shout. Go Spot Check, sponsoring the food. Right. That's the company I work for. Woohoo harder. Go Spot Check. Thank you. Also, we're an open collective, meaning we can take nonprofit donations and we use that money to improve the meetup and sponsor food when we don't have food, or someone to sponsor food. But thank you, Garrett Dawson, Connor, Ian. These are people that give us a recurring $5 every month. Anything and everything helps. So please, if you can give, think about us. I won't even go into this. It's roughly what I just said, what you can get. But if you go to opencollective.com/DenverScript, that's our page. So, what's going on in JS land?
Nothing. What's up with you? Essentially,
I know. I have it up. I swear I know how to use a computer.
Hello, everyone.
There it is.
Oh, hi. So what's going on in JavaScript land? So for those of you guys that are new, we do this every month. We go over it's open conversation. The more that you contribute, the better it is for everybody. We go over new things going on in JavaScript, or even just things that aren't new but are new to you, or exciting moments that you had this month. So to kick off the conversation, whenever there's a new Chrome release and they go into detail about their new dev tools, I always like to dive into that. So here's what I'm excited about this month. Chrome 79 came out. You don't need to worry about writing all of this down or taking pictures or whatever if you hear or see anything interesting. Matt's always really good about taking everything that we go through here and posting it to the comments of today's meetup. So if you want to get links to any of this stuff, you'll find all of that there. And then as you guys submit things that you're interested about, if you know the website of places and stuff like that, that helps because Matt will also add those to the meetup comments as well. So Chrome 79 is out. We're actually on Chrome 80 now, but Chrome 79 is out. The release notes are there. There's a link to a video that goes over the highlights of this stuff, and everything that I'm going over, they'll go over with code samples and stuff like that as well. Not a ton this time, but I'll go through it. Oh, this one's actually kind of cool. The network panel, if you go into there, now it shows you if you had cookies that were blocked, it tells you why. And so if you just go on network, go to cookies, look for the ones that have yellow backgrounds on them. If you like warning, colors. If you hover over it, it'll tell you what the reason is that it got blocked. Another thing is in Chrome 79 and moving forward, they're getting more aggressive on blocking cookies for specific reasons. So if you deal with cookies a lot in what you do, either at work or in projects, I highly recommend that you read that and see sort of why and how they're being more aggressive about their cookie blocking policy. That's a good vocal warm-up. Cookie blocking policy.
Can I ask you a question about that?
You can.
So for people that were using cookies, are people using, doesn't HTML5 have a way to sort of cache information? Are people using that instead? Or what are people doing alternatively if they need to save some kind
That sounds like a great suggestion for a short talk.
Okay.
So if anybody wants to figure out what are people doing instead now that they're getting more aggressive with cookie blocking policies, that'd be a great lightning talk that you can get.
Local storage.
Yeah.
Well, sure. Come on, Matt. Let that
he has some.
fine. Well, I mean, yeah. Local storage, whatever. Progressive web apps. Who cares? Just a fad. Anyway. Okay. Code coverage updates.
Just died a little bit.
Just like the PC. Code coverage updates. If you go to performance and go to coverage, the bar chart that they have is more accessible. That's not super interesting unless you have accessibility concerns yourself. But they do have a drop down now, which is pretty cool, that lets you toggle between CSS and JavaScript. So for those of you that aren't familiar with the code coverage tool and the performance thing, it's really neat. What it does is it loads up your page, and then part of the audit that it gives you is it tells you of all the lines of JavaScript you had on your page, how much of it never even ran, right? Because like as you add new features and stuff like that, and get technical debt and just hold still branches of code, this tells you what percentage of it is not being used. And so now you can actually toggle the analysis between CSS code. Like I know that I'm really bad about that, just classes and stuff that live forever, or JavaScript. The last one that seemed pretty cool on these release notes is in the network tab. So if you go to the network tab at the top, then they have like sub tabs. There's what's called an initiator tab. And with that, you can actually see for any network request that was made, it gives you a call stack trace of what it was that kicked off a network request. So instead of like guessing by the name of the request that was made, you can actually see a full call stack for what was called out. Cool. You guys want to go through the other stuff that you had on here?
Yeah, I had these. Dino, a secure JavaScript TypeScript runner. The guy who, or one of the original creators of Node.js, this is their new baby. Hoping to kill Node with it is kind of their goal. So I couldn't tell you why. I don't know why it's secure, but that's what they're pitching. There's a video. You want to add some color?
Yeah, so I don't know about the security part in particular, but Ryan Dahl did a talk, this is I think the video you're talking about, where he talked about all the things he was ashamed of in Node. And I think a lot of it boils down to like that really obnoxious like overloading thing that's in all of the Node and Express functions, how every single function is overloaded to hell. That was the thing he didn't like. And there were a couple like file system access things that are wide open in Node. I think they tightened up in that. I kind of have low hopes that it's going to go anywhere. I think it's an improvement, but I don't know if it's enough of an improvement right now, like great orbit from Node.
It'll be like IOJS where fixes get merged
Like,
in.
kind of gets pulled in, or like NeoVim or something like that.
Style Components 5 came out with no breaking changes. If you guys haven't upgraded, I just upgraded 2 apps and 0 problems. If you do use them, you have probably seen in React DevTools how shitty it looks, and it's just like provider, consumer, consumer. It actually just says, nah, component, it's great. You can actually tell what the hell you're looking at. Snowpack, I am always wary when someone's like, 0 configuration. And they're basically saying, like, you don't need Webpack. And you'll still need, like, Babel or something to do the transpile, but basically it says it'll handle building your app for you with no questions asked. So give it a shot, or give it a try, I guess.
Cool. So with that, that's what we're excited about. What are you guys excited about? And this can be, again, high-level sort of things going on either in JavaScript, software development in general, or it could be just like a personal sort of like a high-five moment. Oh, I finally figured out how to work with this framework, or I solved this like gnarly bug using whatever, or really anything at all. You're in a room surrounded by nerds, and the kind of people that would appreciate the stuff that your significant other might not, you can share it here. So even if it's not that exciting to anybody else, feel free to share. What are you guys excited about? All right, Phil.
I got to.
Sure.
Console assert,
Okay.
which will log any false assertion. So it takes 2 arguments, your false checker and then like a custom message. So you don't have to write like if this, then console log.
Yep.
use to console cert. Maybe you're checking.
Oh, cool. Yeah.
So it's kind of nice, just a little quicker.
Awesome.
And I love these Google Pro Plus as Go Spot Checker. It's the contract from your front end to back end. So you know exactly the TypeScript what you need. Sound like a GraphQL or
Awesome. Very cool. What else? Come on, guys. Thanks, Kyle.
I've been using Cypress with Cucumber. There's a plugin for it, and it fucking rules. So it allows you to write Gherkin specs. Gherkin specs are like very plain language. There's like 5 or 6 keywords in it. It's all based on given, when, and then. And then you use pretext after that. So your stakeholders are supposed to be able to read these and like even write them without having to work all that much. And it will then expect you to have tests that align with those things. And so you might say something like, given the user is logged in and on the video stage or something, then you write a test that's given and you pass that string in, and then you write the implementation of that test. And so you end up with really tight integration between potentially non-technical stakeholders, your test implementation, and then your actual code. And so I've been writing this for a couple days now, and it is awesome. It ends up like being your documentation also.
Super cool.
Yeah.
Nice.
Should submit a talk.
Yeah. It'll build on your given when then talk from before.
Indeed, exactly. Well, yeah, and for anybody who saw my BDD talk here a couple months ago, I'm still going down the rabbit hole, man. Like the BDD people will write about everything.
Cool. Sweet. Who else?
There's TypeScript protocols.
What's that?
TypeScript protocols. Talk about that.
But and talk or right now.
I mean, like you just added that in there. Is that today? I'm looking for that right now.
Yeah, so it goes spot check. We're using protobufs and TypeScript. So protobufs pretty much become our documentation, or not just documentation, but also like our agreement with the backend API. And then it will actually generate code for both the backend for our Go service and then also for our front services in TypeScript. And then we auto-publish that when it merges in the master, and then that's like a package that we have in our internal Artifactory repo. So then that way if the API changes, it's cool because it won't break, because the protobuf is a package and we will break it once we upgrade. It also makes testing extremely awesome because you get all these types exported out from that generated code. So when you're doing TypeScript and React, it's just like, yeah, it's always going to look like this request or this response. And if you're ever not sure what to do, like command click that and boom, here's all that TypeScript code to show you all the cool stuff that it can do. High level, that's what we're doing.
Do that too, but Google doesn't have an official TypeScript.
Correct. There's a ton of them. The one we do, it's a lot of getters and a lot of setters. Low column A, low column B, we have another team that's using it, and they're doing it more of like what you're used to, like having basically like your response object or request object, and then you send that out. I'm not sure how I feel about all the getters and setters yet. It's still kind of new to me, but we're getting through it. Can do.
What else?
I have a question.
Yeah.
So let me ask about the console cert. Is that part of a JavaScript unit test framework, or are you saying it's a debug? I've never done that, so I don't know.
It's basically just putting your code like that in the browser. So if you're like checking or debugging, it's helpful for that.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Cool. Any others? Hold on. High five moments. Yeah.
It's like a kind of had a need for local overrides like that Chrome has, but I actually wanted to test with build resource in the cloud. And, there's a Chrome extension called Resource Override
Okay.
that does a lot of the same thing that the local overrides does, but you can specify URLs, multi-directional wildcards. There's a lot more tests, and it does like a 307 redirect locally on whatever resource you specify. So if you're needing to test with another resource that's like on S3 or something, kind of pseudo production test where you have something built but it's not deployed.
Yep.
And you want to test it on a customer site. Resource override.
Sweet. Cool. What else? Come on, guys. First meetup of the year.
I got a Chrome plugin that who here always has a shitload of tabs open? Yeah, I'm gonna save your life right now. It's called the Great Suspender. And anytime, like, you can put some rules around it, but like if the tab's been inactive for 30 minutes, it just kills that thread process, so you don't have like a million Chrome processes happening in the background. And then when you come back to that tab, you just click it and it refreshes back.
Oh, wow.
But you can also say, like, don't do it on pin tabs. Like, always let my pin tabs go. Or, you know what, this tab, this domain's special to me. Don't ever sleep on this domain. So it's super awesome, especially when I have like 100 tabs open all the time.
It's fantastic. All right, let's do one more. Anything at all? Yes, in the back, the very back.
On the project I'm working on at work, that'll be nice because like all the old stuff was kind of written. Like you know that picture of the full stack developer course.
Yep.
The old front end stuff was written by that guy basically, and we're gonna have to change it.
So I missed how you started your sentence.
Oh, we're doing like the front end overhaul.
Oh, sweet.
You've never seen it.
Full stack developers. So you're doing a front end overhaul. What are you going to use for the front end?
Well, it's probably going to be mostly the same technology, but like more planning into it, right? We got design this time. Well, we got like single design, just one person does one code stuff. I don't know, because like there's a lot of weird stuff that it does now with like templates. I don't know, it's weird.
Okay.
As it is right now.
Well, cool. Well, congrats on the full stack course.
Still using paperwork.
Oh, jeez. Nice.
Hey, I just was in Backbone, and I'll take jQuery any day.
All right, cool. Sweet. So the last thing I'll say about the JavaScript land is, we didn't have as many this month as we normally do. We did have, several people raise their hand, talk about some cool stuff they're working on. If you heard somebody say something that you found interesting, please get together after the speakers are done and ask questions and share with each other. We only have time for 2 speakers a month, but there's like 50 of you here, right? And we have a lot of really smart people doing cool stuff in this community. So the reason why we do this format is so you can kind of hear some of the stuff people are working on. And please feel free to chat with each other about it after. So yeah, thanks guys.
All right, job announcements. Does anyone here have a job they would like to announce? Please come to the front. Normally we have a microphone for this part, but please use your outdoor voice. Wait.
And while our first person is walking up, for anybody that does job announcements, please make sure that you go to today's meetup, and in the comments you put your contact information and ideally the link to the job that you're talking about, so people, again, don't have to write everything down and remember it all. And come for the screen. Hello, Mom. Yeah.
Hello, friends.
Yeah, there you go.
Hello, I'm Sam. I'm representing Stackhawk. We are a cybersecurity company based here in Denver. We're on 18th California. We are building an industrial strength application security scanner. Think Cypress, but for application security. We have built an awesome back end, a killer scanner, an excellent operations process, and like that full stack developer horse, we really need some front end help. Like our principal architect spent 2 hours like coloring a button today. It was really So no, we got a whole lot of really cool things going on, and we're looking for mid-level to ideally a tech lead for UI to come help us out and build the UI for our application scanner platform. We got a pretty boss logo, and I got stickers.
Yeah.
So go ahead, come find us after we're done.
I think you're just going to make it rain.
Stickers wherever wants them.
I want one.
Yeah.
There's always a spot somewhere on here. Who else? Any other job announcements? Yeah.
Come on
Watch
down.
the power cables.
Hi guys, I'm Michael and this is Panos. We work for McKinsey and Company as part of the Acre engineering team there. Acre deals in some of like the global issues that we face today, stuff like global climate change, global hunger, food distribution, agriculture, stuff like that. We're looking for a couple of engineers to fill out a roster, particularly mid to the senior level. If you have a background in design or in data science, huge plus. And yeah, it's gonna be fun. Let us know afterwards if you're interested.
Oh, okay, great. It's a great opportunity to get both software engineering and some consulting if you are interested in that. So a bit of traveling, a bit of fun. There's always a consulting part to mentor clients that they need help is amazing. So you want some of that, we're a good place.
Anyone else? All right, well, you remember what the faces look like. If you're interested in talking to them about those jobs, find them afterwards. And those people who got the jobs may stick around so people can't talk. Also, call for speakers. We're always looking for speakers. We always have a short talk and a long talk. Feel free to reach out to us in any way possible. You're through the meetup, Denver Devs channel, all three of us. And we will send you the speaker form that you fill out, and then we briefly discuss, and then if it's open, that slot. Currently, we have February filled. We're looking for like March and, forward. So, people that actually brought up some of the stuff in JavaScript land. If those are things that you brought up that you're really interested in, you think they make a good talk, submit it. But yeah, so if anyone has any questions about submitting talks, feel free to grab any one of us entrants. Cool. Yeah, that's the last slide. That's the last slide. All right, good. Woo! Never forget after a month. All right, so we're going to have our first speaker up here. Oh, there you are.
Can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
How long you guys been, maybe you already said this, how long you guys been doing meetups?
5 years next month. I can't believe I've stayed on for 5 years.
While he's getting set up, we still have some pizza left. We have a lot more beer left. So if you want to get any of those things, use the restroom, get some water. That'll be a great time.
Someone plans ahead.
You capture that? Oh, you capture now? Yeah, so
No, that's all good.
Cool, where are you working?
I graduated from Galvanize in October. I'm still looking for work.
You still working? Oh, so you quit without a job lined up?
No. Well, Galvanize, there was no way I was able to work in Galvanize. It was 19.
Yeah. Yeah, I've heard it too.
Outside.
Those boot camps. This guy just went through. They don't need you in those things.
Yeah, it's really all about figuring stuff out. They don't think it's really
Amen.
it's good.
Amen.
It's a big part.
You gotta turn the speaker volume up.
Sounds like you have one job.
You're not still in
To fix the
that
speakers.
Oh, I see, we have to correct it. Acceptance criteria. Yeah, basically.
We gotta send it back to rewrite it. What's the resolution?
Okay, nice. Yeah, that was about the same time that I left.
Did Peter tell you that when you had your baby party, I said you should have been called the gone?
Yeah, I remember that. Yeah, dude, I'll talk to you later about the engineering position. You did say that you were looking for a senior. I'm not really business senior, but you also said
you everyone for coming out. My name is Joe. I'm here tonight to discuss my experience of taking my Flatiron School capstone project and trying to turn it into a business. Moving forward, I have decided to move away from working on this full time, but it was a great experience, and there's some challenges that I felt was worth really sharing. First, I'd like to start with playing a short video explaining my motivation in starting the business, as well as my vision for what I hope the company to become. Just a quick note, I did have to change the name from Lost and Found to Bredkrum about like 2 days after this was made, so anytime I say Lost and Found, I really mean Bredkrum.
Hi, my name is Joe, and I'm a software developer. But before I became a software developer, I was a dreamer. I spent over a year traveling around the world by motorcycle, from the Himalayan mountains of Nepal to Ushuaia, Argentina, located in the southernmost point of South America. I found I was seeing the same things all across the world: kindness, understanding, and connection within communities in time of need. I learned that people do want to help, but often don't have the tools necessary to help effectively. When I returned home, I wanted to bring a little bit of that kindness to everyone. So I created Lost and Found, the solution to the universally frustrating problem of losing something. Because the problem isn't that you lost it, it's that someone has found it and they can't get it back to you. Rather than explain technology, instead, let's imagine this. We all know what it's like to lose an item we value. But what do you do when you are the one to find it? You want to help, but the next step isn't always clear. It doesn't have to be this way. Find, scan, return. Lost and Found is a community where everyone is needed, everyone is a participant, and you are the best person for the job. Whether you're heading out for pizza, heading to work, or riding to the end of the world, with Lost and Found, if we can help find each other, we'll never be lost.
So that was the idea. A passive, low-tech, peer-to-peer communication solution to solve lost items. It started as watching my friend trying to call all the bars, trying to figure out where her ID and her credit card was at. And it was like, how is it possible that she can't get something back that has her name on it? So I started to look at all the other tracking solutions, and I saw that everything was extremely tech-heavy and very complicated. I thought instead of trying to create a smaller Bluetooth or GPS device, what if we go the other way? What if we go low tech, no tech, take advantage of what we all have access to? And two things that stood out to me were smartphone cameras being able to read QR codes natively and a device attached to the internet. I thought maybe could there be a solution that I could create that would be language and technology agnostic. So for my capstone project, I created that first version. It was really just a proof of concept. And then as I was moving forward, I was really trying to figure out like how do I start a business. And talking with other founders, I really found that the only job you have is to really invalidate any ideas that you have immediately and get things off your plate as soon as possible. One area that I really wasted a lot of time in was creating business plans. I did find that it was really just busy work, and I really felt busy doing it, and I was really just making things up. But I did see in those areas I was making up that a lot of questions and assumptions came out of them, and I figured those were areas I should really focus on some sort of testing. And then, with those questions and assumptions, like how can one person really test these without going broke? So I thought one item that was really perfect to lose would be keys. Everyone has keys, everyone's lost keys. Keys really have no value outside of their owner. And I thought that just seeing keys might make someone do something. I didn't want to lose my keys, and making keys was very expensive. So I found a guy on eBay and I bought 15 pounds of them. So the first test I wanted to run was before we build anything, like, does anyone care? Removing all barriers of communication, before the QR code, before the app, would anyone return my keys if I made it as easy as possible? So I made 5 key rings, I made a little message, had the my phone number and my name on it, and then I went over to the Sky Bridge over there by Blake Street Station. I threw them on the stairs and I ran back to my office and I watched through the window. And I just went and I did this a lot, and the results were like overwhelming. The time to return averaged about 7 minutes until I had the keys back in my hand. I couldn't physically keep the keys out long enough. People were just calling too fast. So there were some interesting lessons though that were here. I certainly validated people care. But then as well as I found that it was very confusing and clunky, that initial communication between the finder and the owner. Does the finder keep them? Can they leave them? And then as I was watching people, I really felt like they were trying to reason, like, how much help could I really be? I'm on lunch, I want to help, I don't know what to do. And I saw that there was some confusion about what to do next, what they could really do. So then taking this information and moving on, I moved on to the next version or next design, and that was using the QR code with the key tag. I took the data from the first test and I rebuilt the landing page of the app, and then I started running the first test. And the first test took place at the Great American Beer Fest. And after I scouted a location and dropped the keys, they were back in my hand within 4 minutes. So someone was able to find them, figure out the QR code, land with my app, and then send me a message. It was awesome. This certainly was encouraging. I rolled out more tests around Denver and in different environments. Subsequent tests were not as successful, I'd say. While I only lost one set of keys in total in all my testing, it highlighted a very clear education problem. But it also highlighted like an unquantifiable intent to help. I mean, people wanted to do something. I watched people trying to figure out the QR code or not be that familiar with it, and eventually become frustrated and give it to an authority figure. So they might give it to the barista at the coffee shop or a lost and found counter. So I was like, okay, people want to help, but they also don't know about this. So maybe if I focused on micro communities that are identified as groups of people who have a problem that Bredkrum could solve, maybe that's a good place to go, and I can educate everyone at once. Because I couldn't educate all of Denver to return keys. So then I took all this information and I created a new build. And then with this, along the same lines as before, I want to use this data and create the next version of the app, but I am only one person. So there's 3 areas that really stood out to me that really helped me. The first was PWAs. Kyle did not pay me to say that. As one person, especially as a new developer, there was no way I was going to be able to manage iOS, Android, web, landscape, portrait, and all the different testing that goes along with it. And also, I didn't need an app. I just needed an MVP to go collect data. And the beautiful, amazing benefit of PWAs is it worked instantly everywhere on the browser, which was awesome. There's no need to download any new apps to read QR codes. Everything just worked. Then next was going serverless. I had dreams as an entrepreneur, starting to have a lot of traffic. And as a developer, I knew there was going to be a lot of problems that would have popped up with that I didn't really want to figure out. I didn't have too much interest in. This really allowed me to focus on the front-end problems and create new, more interesting or fun solutions. As well as I only have so much time, so we will do the scaling. The third was the stickers and variable data printing. So one thing I found that was very challenging was trying to how to produce unique stickers at scale cheaply. And I really was having difficulty time figuring it out until I discovered variable data printing. And this is a very underutilized part that every print shop uses. And with this, I was able to produce things very cheaply. And these stickers ended up being about 15 cents each. So then with all this information, this new build, I decided to roll out a larger beta program. And the idea was to gather more information about different target markets, different communities that can be involved with. So focus on micro communities that have a problem, and hopes that once they saw that I could solve one problem, it might naturally apply it to other areas of their lives. Gather information about how they're using it, what items they're putting it on, and then the idea was to follow up every scan event with some sort of survey. How did it work? Did it work? Would you pay for it? How much would you pay? So I rolled out to the Flatiron students back in December, and I thought the Flatiron students were a really great fit because when I was a student, I remember everyone had the MacBook and the MacBook charger and moving around, and then they'd go missing. So that was a nice solution. So we launched in December, and everything went awesome. I got the users. I got the app didn't crash. I got some really great feedback. People said some really nice things. It was awesome. But nearly immediately, I realized that I had really some of my core assumptions were either overlooked or just wrong, and specifically around the scanning frequency. People just weren't losing things fast enough to really drive a serious data decision, as well as things that were lost out in the wild weren't being returned. So back to the education problem. But that kind of makes sense, at least with the frequency, because ideally this never gets scanned. You put it on your thing and then hopefully you never lose it. But in terms of lessons learned, it was certainly exciting to design and create something for the consumer. Education was a much bigger piece than I was expecting. And short of total adoption, awareness, or education, I'm not sure if it really work in that consumer space. It might work with a larger organization that's a smaller community that has a need, that's in some sort of physically confined environment, like a Disney World or an on-campus university. I think it could work. But without a clear path to monetization, I can't continue to pour my resources into it. In closing, I really enjoyed the experience. I was encouraged by the resources that are out there. I really enjoyed making things, and so I woke up a creative side of me that I haven't really been able to use in a long time, so that's awesome. I do think it made me a better developer as a beginner, to really understand the why of a question. Why was I making things this way? How was I going to support it? As well as like why to use best practices. In addition to being able to reframe the problem and then create a solution for that problem, which I think was probably the best. So I do encourage anyone who has an idea to go out and build it. I think that as developers, we have a really unfair advantage over non-technical founders. The amount of times I heard someone say they spent between $15,000 and $100,000 to create an MVP of an app was like amazing, so many times. And they were left with something that didn't work because they would understand the problem a little bit differently, and they couldn't iterate on the actual app. And they were left with like a pile of junk for $100,000. So I'm not working full time. The service, we're working on this full time. The service will continue. So if anyone wants to use it, I'd be happy to give some stickers and try it out. As well as if anyone has any advice or feedback on how I should maybe summarize this as I go out to my job search, I really appreciate it. But thank you so much for your time and listening. Really appreciate it. Thank you.
Was Kyle your teacher?
No, that was my teacher.
So I think the idea is super cool. The PWA was an interesting way to solve it. But actually, I have a non-technical question. How did you have that really good production quality for your description video? Like, how did you put that together?
So that, I mean, I enjoyed it, but it was a little, it's not as juddery. Like, I'm not on the airplay, but that's actually one of my buddies. He's like a video content producer for Travel Leisure Magazine in New York. And I was like, I graduated the program and I was like, I need to make some stuff. Like, these are the videos I made. I need something better for like investors and for pitch competitions and stuff. And he loved the idea. And he's like, all right, well, if you come to New York, we'll build it. And like, we'll make it. So he built the whole thing for me, which is awesome.
So have a friend.
Yeah,
I have a couple. There's some good ones. But the videos were great. I love them.
So know a guy who was really good at video content. So.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I made it. Every project that I did, at least in school, I made a video along with it. But yeah, that one was, I thought it was great.
But did you throw down any, you maybe answered this, did you throw your project on any social media platform?
So that was like one thing that I really struggled with. At the end, maybe last week, I did post a video finally. I did keep things kind of under wraps. That was like another thing that I learned was certainly like the intellectual property and the strategy piece. Because I was like, oh wow, I think I have this great idea, but then I didn't want, but that's not really the case. So I kind of kept off that, as well as like I didn't really have the stickers or anything manufactured really for the last 2 months. So there wasn't really anything to give people. It was just kind of like, this is what I'm working on, is the idea.
A couple of questions. And you might have said this before, but what were some of your ideas on how to monetize?
Sure. I think the original idea, at least in terms of like trying to gather this data, I thought that maybe I could do like a pay what you want type model. So I couldn't put a value on it. I did think there was an inverse relationship between like item and number of times scanned. So like you might put it on your laptop, but you might only use your laptop once. But that one time is very valuable. But you might put it on like, I don't know, a charger, and that might get scanned twice a week. But so the value of that isn't as high. So I thought that maybe if I return someone's laptop, they might give me a lot more money. And then I could try to drive some sort of data and then maybe try to find some new product market fits. Because, depending on where the item was lost, I found that really drove how the finder screen, which that won't get, because it probably makes sense to use like Google Maps or something like this, but if you lose it within an office building, Google Maps really isn't a great solution for that because it's inside that building. But I think there were some other ones of like some subscription models maybe. But again, that was kind of goes back to the social media part. I felt like if I pushed this out too fast and like things weren't being returned, then the intrinsic value or the perceived value of it would just be destroyed before I had a chance to create anything. I do think there's like perfect fits for like moms and like kids and stuff, but like I can only imagine one mom ripping me apart on like Facebook, and then like that's it. So that was kind of scary. Kind of trying to navigate that too.
Okay. And my other question is, from what I've seen, or from what I think, and plenty of people might disagree, is that if you have your first iteration, which is just you have your name and your phone number, it's really obvious that, okay, if they see your name, they see your phone number, they'll return it because this belongs to Joe. This is his number. But if they see a QR code, the QR code, it's not universally understood. It's not a Facebook logo or anything. So they don't really know that they're supposed to scan the QR code to return it, or they're supposed to scan the QR code to do something else.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think that came on the education piece. It was the thing that I really struggled with is that like scanning with camera sounds like it makes sense, but like literally every other QR code that you'll see in the wild has that, and no one scans them. So like I didn't feel like it was like a good product design choice to do that. And after you learned it, you didn't really need it anymore. So like that was kind of my argument with that. Because it was very interesting. The people that did figure out the QR code, like they maybe had the knowledge of what a QR code was to start with, but people didn't figure it out. They like knew it was a name tag or something. It was different. It was worth something to at least look at. My original assumption was that maybe someone would Google, like their need to help would actually like over their knowledge, they would just go Google it and try to figure it out. That wasn't really the case. It seemed like people became frustrated and then wanted to just give it to an authority figure or like do something that satisfied their conscience. But then I found that like trying to drive finder behavior, like leaving things, because if you ever find something on the street, don't move it. Like because the person comes back through there, they're not going to go into that coffee shop they brought it into. We're not going to give them that bar because they didn't know that they actually lost it. So that was like one of the biggest things, like trying to figure out that problem of like when that thing does scan, like how do I tell the person just to leave it?
Have you thought of making it a bounty hunting game? Like I lost my laptop, I would pay $400 to get my laptop back, right?
Yeah.
And I posted in the app, and people can be bounty hunters to like find my stuff, and they can say I lost it in this area, so people go and find it.
Yeah, I think
like how bird chargers are, but
yeah,
maybe the percentage.
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's different versions of that. To be able to test something like that and build something out like that, you're kind of running out of time, honestly. I think that there is something here with this like in-person like authentication. Like the only way to go to this website is if you have this QR code. Like the way these parameters are at the end, like you can't guess it. Just too large. So I think there could be other uses for it, whether it's a game or gamifying something like that. But it was also trying to figure out the problem or trying to solve the problem of like educating everyone or bringing awareness to everyone. And I was like, well, maybe if I could just blanket everyone in Denver before they lose anything, then I could win. But that wasn't really realistic. Anyone else?
You mentioned something about variable. Can you instead of talk about what that means?
Sure. So variable data printing is something that's in like print medium services that like just allow you. So the way that these were produced was I had a design, and in the middle with the QR code, I was like, I want a QR code there. And then here's a spreadsheet of 2,000 separate URLs that I want each individual one to go to. So instead of me trying to create one individual sticker every time, or trying to figure out, like you'll see a lot of other QR code-based things like this will have like some sort of code that's under it, so that you go to a website and type in the code. This took that step out of that. So the only way to land it there is for that person's unique entry. And variable data printing really unlocked that, because originally I was going through the sticker view and all these people, and I was like, how do I do this? And they're like, maybe even $1 a sticker, buying 2,000 stickers, like from a business model standpoint, I just really couldn't do that. But variable data printing allowed me to do stickers and keychain tags and really anything else that was like produced from some sort of manufacturer, because everyone's using this same printing system, but no one uses this variable data printing.
When you do variable data printing, do you sort of generate a PDF or some type of document that you send to the printer, or do you work with the printer and then there's a process to generate that for their system to upload?
It was a lot easier than I was expecting. I thought there may be something, I got to submit something, I got to get some approvals. I mean, after I signed off on it, they're like, all right, you want this and this? Done. And really, it was just a Google spreadsheet of the base URL. So it was like bredkrum.com/foundit/ and then a whole nother column of all my individual identifiers. And they were all, there's 8 digits long, alphanumeric, upper and lowercase. So it was like 227 trillion combinations. So like they were able to go and make that no problem. It was just my only job was to keep track of the ones I used, really.
Okay, thank you.
Anyone else?
It's a kind of a random idea, but it seems like the technology could be used for like a DIY geocaching game. If I wanted to set up a geocaching for friends locally, it'd be a really easy way and cheap way.
Yeah, I think, I mean, I would, like, there's so many different options, like even like ultimate frisbee players or something, like, you know, there's some sort of community that wants this. Like, if I can figure out a way to like containerize it and like sell it and then like plug it into like my printers and just have everything done, like, I think that'd be pretty sweet. Like, so then I don't have to go and find like the elementary school to go sell this to, like, they can find me and just set it up, you know, because like even these, like, this understands, you know, you scan it once, it knows whether or not it's registered.
And that's all the education problem. You just find one group of people
Yeah.
that are educated already and set up to do it.
Right. Yeah, thanks. Thanks. Cool. All right, well, thank you, everyone. Appreciate it.
Next up, Charles. Oh, there you go.
Also, another great opportunity for pizza beer.
Yeah, there's more pizza, there's more beer.
But I did it. I actually ended up not using the back button instead of doing it because I have to do so I ended up starting to that took about, I was doing about 300 requests. I did that. But then the issue is that it doesn't take place. Yeah, I would do it. So but I chose that thing. So I just
All right.
I don't know. And then you can find out, you can see if there's a what's the rest of the yeah. Yeah, I was 10,000 really about 300. I think it's because of like just
Plus, you also plug in.
Yeah, I do all of that.
Oh, there you go.
It wasn't a good
That was actually super interesting.
It's also it's always interesting to hear about you lose something. Oh, yeah. So, this is
All right, everybody. Charles is up on the line. Thanks everybody for coming. My name is Charles Ging. I'll be talking about the project, an open source project that I recently worked on with 2 other developers called RedPoint. It's a web-native computational notebook geared towards programmers. And in this talk, I'll kind of briefly give you an overview of the kind of high-level goals and features of this notebook. And then we'll dive into kind of the technical journey that we faced. So first of all, what's RedPoint? It's this computational notebook optimized for note sharing and sharing notes about code or algorithms with your fellow developer. It allows you to write and execute, at this point, 3 different programming languages within the same browser. So currently we support Ruby, JavaScript, and Python. And interleaved,
Up to you. If you're going to sit down.
that's all right. And then interleaved with your code cells, you can also edit markdown cells that can be rendered between your runnable code. And as a web native app, we're able to leverage some cool technologies that I'll describe later. So let's take a step back. Is there anybody familiar with computational notebooks, Jupyter notebooks? So we're, okay, not a whole lot. So I'll just kind of give you the quick and dirty, very quick and dirty. There's this notion of a cell-based design where you have multiple cells. In this notebook, we have 3 JavaScript cells, and then we've got some markdown in between them. And then all of your code cells share state. Yeah. So then you have descriptive cells, not part of the code, that you can use to document code or describe algorithms or present questions about a snippet that you can share with someone. And then the combination of runnable code cells and then this rich markdown text allows you to create these computational narratives, right? So it's an interactive document that you can share with others who can receive your code and your questions and then iterate on what you've written. So most of us may have our go-to note-taking applications, which are static documents, right? So on the left, we have a Quiver notebook, where we have markdown text and then static code. So there's some overhead involved in copy-pasting your code right into your editor and executing it. And then here, I don't know if anyone's familiar with Observable, HP. It's very awesome for data visualization. However, it has some unique flavor of JavaScript that requires a little bit of, just a bit of a learning curve before you can use it. But it's a very cool tool. You can adjust these sliders that adjust inputs to the code below and then affect that visualization. So we wanted to pin ourselves somewhere between static note-taking apps and then these computational notebooks that are very popular in data science. So very awesome tools. However, there are some kind of gotchas regarding hidden state and kind of a complex hidden state and scope. Not very user-friendly, especially for new programmers or people learning a new language. So, and then like I mentioned with Observable, some of them have kind of a unique flavor of the supported language. So why did we build Bredkrum? Again, I said it was to fit somewhere in between these static notebooks and then a rich data science geared notebook. So yeah, and then this project is free and open source, so it's relatively easily self-hosted. There is some configuration involved. But so in today's talk, I'll just give you an overview of our goals, some of the core features, some nice GIFs. Then we'll talk about kind of the foundations of the project. The network architecture, user experience really drove how we execute code and then render the results of that code execution cleanly in the UI. And then we'll talk about security concerns, because we'll get to that, but then also management of our host resources among concurrent sessions. And then lastly, I'll give you just the overview of the whole system architecture. So then the high-level goals are to provide a predictable scope and state I kind of alluded to some of the hidden state that you see with existing notebooks. So we want just a top-down state and scope, as if each cell of JavaScript on this notebook belongs to the same script, right? We would like to clearly display the results of code execution. So here we just have some log statements in there highlighted in green. We'd like to be able to execute multiple languages in the same notebook. They don't share the same state between different languages. That would be cool, but each set of languages belong to one another, right? And then we wanted to leverage the web native status. Again, I'll get to some of those features we were able to enjoy. So here's that first goal. As a multi-language notebook, we can add a Ruby cell, there's a JavaScript cell, and then last we'll add a Python cell. You could either run one of these individually, or at the very top, you can run them all. So it's very nice to compare language features across a couple different languages. As a web app, we support ingesting both API data and webhook data, so I'll get to that a little bit later. And when you receive that data, you can then add a cell, another JavaScript cell, and then interact programmatically with that payload. And again, it's free and open source, so list it as you wish. So first, we'll talk about some network architecture and the early decisions and challenges we face. So step one, we're allowing the user to edit and execute code. Where are we going to execute that code, right? So you can do that on the client side or on the server side. And on the client side, of course, the major benefit is that your browser interprets your code. Everything's super speedy and fast. There's no latency, right? So then the downside of the client side code execution are that we have no control over the resources powering a user's session. So we'd like to provide a uniform experience for mobile users as well as desktop. And the biggest downside to a client-side execution is that browsers only support JavaScript. So unless we provide an in-browser compiler for every single supported language, which would create a very heavy client-side app, we're limited to JavaScript. Right? So we chose to execute code on the server side, which allows us to manage and include support for multiple languages a bit easier just by including that language's runtime on the server. We have consistent resources that are within our control, so it allows us to scale a little easier. And the downside is the latency incurred by that round-trip visit to a server and back, right? Of course. And then, of course, we're allowing people to run arbitrary code on our system, so security is a big issue. So we took a few steps to mitigate that, which I'll get to a bit later. But now that we know our server's running our code, we needed to decide on a protocol. How are we exchanging this data, right? So early on, in our early prototypes, we just said, let's just try it out over HTTP, which works well in very simple code examples. But since our server can only issue a single response per request, things got a little, the experience left a lot to be desired when given some asynchronous code or code that executes at different speeds, right? So in this example, you see we have a set timeout in the log statement and then a console log high. That high won't be able to be rendered until we finish executing the code, which will be in 10 seconds, right? So we're going to only be able to render everything all at once. So we need some sort of a persistent connection, or persistent-like. So we didn't really, we only very briefly considered the idea of polling, which would be wildly inefficient to submit some code for execution and then rapidly pull that server for its standard out and return. So we quickly ditched that idea. Server-side events do offer a persistent connection, but it's primarily a one-directional flow where a client subscribes to some data stream. So we needed a two-way street, right? So WebSockets offer us a fully duplex form of communication, which would allow our client to submit code to the server for execution. And during the process of executing that code, we can fire back one or many WebSocket messages in response. Another advantage to WebSockets is we can easily detect a client's disconnection when that close event fires, allowing us to free up resources associated with that user session. And there's decreased latency, as each WebSocket message has a much smaller packet size than an HTTP request. And then just the primary trade-off with WebSockets was some added code complexity, namely in proxying, which I'll get to in a bit. So that same asynchronous code now will look like this over a WebSocket connection. After that initial HTTP handshake, we get that fully duplex connection, and our user sends some code over to be executed, and we generate a script and run it as a child process, and are able to listen to the standard out. And when we get standard out off that process, we just fire back WebSocket messages to the client, and then receives it, renders it in the appropriate spot. So now let's talk about our user experience, because it, as I said earlier, it really dictated how we execute our code. So our design goals for the user experience were to, again, provide that predictable top to bottom scope and state. I mention that because it sounds like there aren't too many people familiar with computational notebooks, but it is possible to run cells in arbitrary order, so you can jump around the page. So we wanted a top-down scope and state. A clean user interface where we render results under the cell responsible for that piece of feedback off that code's execution. So the first question is, how do we share scope across multiple cells of a given language? And it's a fairly straightforward approach. Say we have a notebook with 3 Ruby cells, and third cell is executed, which is effectively the same thing as running all Ruby cells or all cells of the same language up to and including the cell you've run. So when the user runs the third cell, we send the code cells over in an array, which is received by the server, and it's joined together into a single script, so that variables declared in the second cell are in scope in the third. So then how do we get these clean execution results without too much hassle? So you'll see our output is highlighted in green, so return value will come out in white, and errors in red. So our options are to generate a REPL process for the appropriate language type, and feed the user's code into that REPL, and then parse the results. So that's one option. And then the other is to generate a temporary file of the appropriate language, so a JS file or RB file, whatever it is, and execute that, and see if there may be an opportunity to get these results of execution a little cleaner than parsing. So I've kind of alluded to this a few times, this notion of hidden state, and it looks like this. And this is by no means meant to bash on these existing solutions. They exist for super heavy data, basically huge data sets, where you're able to minimize or save the computation of an earlier cell. What that would look like for us in a fairly simpler approach is if you declare this variable and execute it, this cell, only to realize in this const declaration we have a typo, and we come over and in the same cell we fix the typo and execute that once more. We get this error that the variable's already been declared. And that's because there's a persistent REPL that powers this notebook. So across all execution requests, there's a persistent REPL running in the background. So we've had 2 const declarations that we can't see. So this is a pretty simple example, but you can see how much more complicated notebook that could drive you crazy, really. Unless you're used to those notebooks out there, like Jupyter, they're great. So what we chose to do instead of this having a persistent REPL is to respawn a REPL process for every code execution request. So instead of stacking state in a REPL that we can't see, we just spin up a new REPL every time. So it's kind of what you see is what you get. That code top to bottom is thrown into the REPL as you see it in your notebook. The trade-off here is that unlike Jupyter, we have to perform computation on every cell. They're able to save the results of an earlier cell's computation, which is very handy when you're dealing with massive data sets, but we have a slightly different use case. So if we relied solely on a REPL to parse out results, we'd fairly easily be able to parse the last line of the REPL, right, to get that return value. But to get errors and logged output, we'd be tasked with coming up with a pretty complex parsing strategy, and a parsing strategy per supported language to skim out all the version numbers and everything else you see. Additionally, errors aren't going to halt the execution in a REPL. We're just going to encounter that error and then feed the next line into the REPL and again and again. So not great, but fairly easy to parse the return value. The other option is to build a temporary file, like I mentioned, and execute that as a child process and listen to data events on standard out and standard error. And so in this little image, you can see that happening during the process. We get the standard out, fire it across to the client. We do the same with standard error. Standard errors will also kill the script's execution. So if you encounter an error in the second of 3 code cells, you're not going to see anything of that third cell. So we're easily able to get standard error, standard out errors, errors halt execution without any weird complex parsing strategies, so that's great. Then the drawback is we don't have any return values. So we implemented a combination of these two strategies using a promise chain, where we receive the code, generate a script, execute that script to obtain standard out and standard error, fire it back to the client. If there are no errors, we then execute the REPL, parse the return value, fire it back to the client. If we do encounter an error when the script executes, we just reject that promise, exit the chain. So then, where do we render the results of code execution? Since our script that we build on the server, that's an aggregate of all the code cells, has no notion of a cell-based origin. Right, so that looks kind of like this. Our code cells come over to the server, they're joined into a single script. We listen to the standard out, fire messages back to our client, and it goes, where do you render me? How do you do it? So our approach was to use the delimiter strategy. So when we receive codes, a bundle of code cells and generate that one script of them, we inject these log statements or print statements that contain a UUID. So that way, when we're listening to the standard out of that script, when we encounter one of these delimiters, instead of sending the value over to the client of that delimiter, we just send a message that says, hey, React client, increment the cell that you're going to be rendering below. So it's kind of a little delimiter strategy. So let's get on to security and resource management, because obviously when you're allowing people to run their code on your server, it's kind of a scary situation. We also need to be able to manage our host resources across concurrent sessions. So major inherent concerns are a malicious user interfering with your host file system, deleting files, escalating the privileges, gaining control of everything. Sky's the limit, right? So there's a lot to be considered there. And then another concern we had was spreading the host resources evenly across our users' concurrent sessions. So the first question is, how do we safely execute some users' code? A naive approach would be to just, on the client side, just come up with a blacklisting strategy, parse their input, and reject any requests that contain something that looks scary or harmful, right? So that's possible, I suppose, but you'd have to be very creative and comprehensive in your parsing strategy to consider every possible malicious attempt that could be made on your host system. Not only that, complexity in your application logic, you could misidentify some non-malicious code, rejecting somebody's friendly code, leaving them with poor taste in their mouth. So the approach we ended up taking to isolate user sessions from one another was more of a system-level approach, where we containerize each session in a Docker container. And by spinning up a separate Docker container for each session, we're able to effectively provide some layer of isolation between sessions and a session and host. Let's see, so very brief overview of Docker containers. Each of these containerized applications is built based on a Docker image. It's like a blueprint for your application. Contains all the software and dependencies that you might require in this virtualized operating system. They're very fast to spin up, which is handy since we're providing one for every session. And yeah, and using that blueprint, we can just spin up as many as we like. Also, we can deploy our application on any host system, regardless of its configuration. So, containers. So using containers to isolate our user sessions, if a user enters some malicious code, they are only impacting their copy of the application code, leaving other users' sessions unharmed. Also, each user has a fresh copy of the application, so there won't be any remnants or artifacts of previous sessions. So another step we took to protect our Docker container was to create a new non-root user, and this is because by default, in a Docker container, the default user is granted root level permissions, which afford that root level a few too many potentially harmful commands. So in our Docker image, we define a new non-root user, give that user a new bin folder with safe whitelisted commands, and then in order to keep that user from potentially changing their bash profile to gain access to other binaries, we changed the ownership of the default user's bash to root, and we revoke their write permissions in their own bash profile. So with those layers of security, we still could benefit from another layer of insulation from the host. So we implemented, so Docker containers aren't a true sandbox. They have direct access to the host's kernel. And I mentioned they spin up very quickly, and it's for that reason. They interact directly with our host kernel. So if our malicious user happens to be able to break from their container despite the previous safeguards we've implemented, they have direct access to the host kernel and perform a kernel exploit and escalate their privileges and gain control of everything. So that's to be avoided. So we implement a technology from Google called gvisor, which provides a much stronger isolation between a container and the host. gvisor is an alternate secure runtime for Docker containers. It re-implements system calls in a safe rule-based way. So it basically is bodyguard for system calls to your host kernel. It also virtualizes the host's file system, which means that, again, if that malicious user starts messing with the file system, they're working on a virtualized copy of it. So this sandboxing wasn't without some trade-offs, because as an alternate runtime, gvisor consumes a bit more memory. So we could support about, after some load testing, we found about 25% fewer containers on our host. And then there's also a slight hit performance in each notebook, but given the increased security profile, we're okay with these trade-offs. So how do we now prevent one container or session from hogging the host resources? So in this little slide, you see a greedy container running some infinite loop, right? And this container is going to hog our host resources, and that's because Docker containers will consume as many CPU cycles as possible unless we govern it in some way. So in this example, without any strategy of spreading those resources out, this user is going to be left, they're not going to be able to, what's hello world? Console log hello world. So we need some strategy of spreading out those resources. So we do that with Linux control groups. And one of our Docker configurations, when we spin up a new container, allows us to govern or set a limit to how many CPU cycles a container is allowed access to. So in setting this, we're able to provide a performant application, but we also prevent any one user from just taking over our entire host's CPU. All right, so now that we've talked about security, let's look at our system architecture, maybe what we've all been waiting for. So now that we're containerizing our applications, we've addressed our security concerns, but we are left with some interesting engineering challenges. How do we connect a user to a container? how do we manage that user's session data, and how do we handle our persistence since we support saving, cloning, and of course loading the notebook. So our solution was for managing all these interactions was to build a central hub we call the dispatch server, which has 3 primary responsibilities that I'll talk about, cover briefly in this section. So it stands up as a reverse proxy. It manages our session data and container management, so it spins up JSON containers. And it also centralizes database interactions. So here's the overview of the system. So over there, we have our React client on the front end who does all of its communicating with the dispatch server. That dispatch server speaks with Redis, where we store our session data and where we queue webhook data. I'll get to that a little bit. The dispatch server also talks to MongoDB to persist notebook data and webhook data associated with the notebook. And then it also lastly stands between client and that client's containerized application, and it proxies messages and requests between the two. So now that we're connecting users with containers, we need a strategy of mapping that user to their container, right? So the native solution is to port forward and assign a port on our domain for each user's session. It's a pretty straightforward approach and an easy mapping to map that unique port to that user's container, but it's pretty vulnerable to a port scanning attack, where a malicious user or bot could just run through a bunch of ports, gain access to a live session, and there goes that session security, right? So our dispatch server masks the internals, masks the location of these containers by acting as a reverse proxy. So we receive all our messages from the client by way of the dispatch server, who recognizes the session and maps the messages to the appropriate container. So that looks something like this. If anybody's not familiar with reverse proxying, well, our client sends a request to the dispatch server, so that they send their code to be evaluated to the dispatch server, who does a lookup for which container to send a request to, sends a request along to the containerized application server, where we execute the code and then fire back WebSocket messages to the dispatch server, who forwards them back to the client where they are rendered. So then the next responsibility of that dispatch server is to manage Redis, manage session data in Redis, and spin up Docker containers for a new session, as well as tear them down when that session is terminated. And so since our reverse proxy hides the IP address and port of the container on our host system, and our client has no awareness of that actual IP address, we need some way to map the requests and proxy the requests back and forth. And so we do that by assigning a unique subdomain URL. That's the key in that, it's the key to that hash. And that subdomain URL is the user's URL that they use for the remainder of the session. So that URL is kind of used as a lookup key whenever messages come from the client to the dispatch server. It looks up the actual location of the container and forwards the request along. And by generating a sufficiently unique subdomain URL, we ensure a pretty good degree of security. So now that we're collecting the session data in order to proxy requests, we need to store it somewhere. And the easy approach that we started with was just storing it in a JavaScript object on our dispatch server, which was easy and straightforward, but it offered no great degree of persistence. If we need to take that server down for maintenance or if it suffers some downtime, there goes our session data. So we use Redis to persist session data a bit stronger. It's still very speedy as an in-memory key value store. And it just as a downside, increased a bit of complexity as well as configuration if you were to host this on your own. So finally, the dispatch server centralizes all our database interactions. So we prohibit clients from interacting directly with our database. So all queries pass through the dispatch server before any data is persisted in Mongo. And the coolest thing in my mind about the dispatch server is that it stands as a consistent endpoint for webhook data, which is how which is the last feature I'll talk about tonight. So, everyone or most people familiar with webhooks? So, each notebook is assigned a unique endpoint. So if you choose to register that endpoint with a webhook provider, you can do so. Let's see. So webhooks are asynchronous and event-driven. So user can register their endpoint with this external service, and when an event occurs on that external service, it will post some relevant data to that unique endpoint, which is handled by our dispatch server. And we store that data away in Mongo in the associated notebook. But since we're no longer in control of the rate or the quantity of incoming data in webhooks, as opposed to APIs, you submit a GET request, you get what you ask for. Webhooks, we're not in control of that rate of traffic hitting our system. So when a webhook provider posts some data to your provided endpoint, we first put it in a buffer in a Redis message queue, where we have a background process that at a set rate dequeues that data and sticks it into the document in MongoDB associated with that notebook. Thanks for coming tonight. My name is Charles Ging. I'm looking for my next full-time opportunity. Here's a more complete write-up about the project and some of my contact info. Thanks.
Couple questions. You mentioned Jupyter. What does Jupyter not do that you wanted to do this for? Is Jupyter a similar computational framework? I don't use it. So
it's definitely geared towards data scientists and data science. We wanted something that was a bit easier just to spin up and share some executable code next to some notes potentially. And if you've ever tried to use a Jupyter notebook, there are some easier, like there's a desktop, those screenshots from an app called Interact. Just a bit easier to get started using, but yeah, I don't know if that answers you.
Yeah, and then you mentioned Docker containers, but where are your Docker containers? I mean,
so our host,
GCP, and how do you?
Yeah, so our entire we chose to host on GCP, and so on our instance we have our Docker image, and when a request comes in, we use the Docker remote API from within that application or that dispatch server to spin up a new container based on that image. So we had a continuous integration where when something was pushed to master, the image on our GCP instance is updated.
Okay, the GCP is not free, right?
Correct.
How do if I'm a user, how do you pay for the time on the server for those Docker containers spinning up?
We're currently paying for them.
Okay. Well, thank you.
Yeah.
All right.
And this is the write-up URL. If you want to try the application itself, it's at redpointnotebooks.com without any spaces.
I'm not super familiar with Docker. I mean, I hear about it at a lot of different talks. So this might be a stupid question, but do people use Docker for security reasons a lot?
Yeah, I'm no. Yeah, I think it's a standard use case. I'm no professional with Docker containers by any means, but they do offer a bit of insulation, especially when you're talking about because it's a virtualized operating system. It does offer some a bit more difficulty to start interacting with the host and other sessions.
Can I throw something out of that? So we've done a few talks on Docker at the Java user group, and I think it's slimmed down. It's not a full OS. And if something goes bad, just kill it. Let's get another one. They're really lightweight. Right. They're fast to spin up. It's not like a VM. So that's why.
Cool.
Thank you.
Why did you not use something more native to just be like a pops out for the messaging system?
That's a great question. I'd like to hear more about it. I don't know, we just went with Redis since we'd already used Redis to persist our session data, and there's some nice libraries for managing a message queue.
And the Redis would because also GCP has a memcache service.
Oh, it's right on GCP also.
Yeah. Like using the service for manifest of TCP or?
No, we've just installed Redis right on the instance.
Oh. You could save some money.
Okay. that's good to know.
Thinking of it for demonstrating that interactive documentation or an API, how I use this and basically how far can it go? Like, what's like the most complex things to run into? Can you sort of import sort of resources and essentially the documentation? But like where's the limit? What's the most crazy thing you've run into?
This is about as far as we've gotten, but we have considered the possibility of including different libraries that you could use. Support just a handful of libraries. If you haven't heard of RunKit, are you all familiar with RunKit? Check that out. It apparently has every single npm package so you can just include a package and interact with it, test it out. Yeah, RunKit is pretty sweet. But they don't have multiple languages.
So you only have access to like the outside of this.
Yeah, I mean, sky's the limit really as a web application. I suppose that's entirely within the realm of possibility.
I thought instead of running your code in your own containers, just throw it on TCP function. Like you could have this serverless, I think. Besides the sockets, you might have been able to have the serverless.
I hadn't considered that.
And you don't have to pay for it. Well, you'll pay some.
Serverless is free.
Well,
GCP. Well, kind of.
You could have functions and you could kill all the security issues GCP did before.
Sounds like a pull request.
I want to say, as an individual who stares at screens for the majority of their day, I appreciate your attention to dark themes.
Yes, you'll like using the notebook. It kind of reflects.
You should have a toggle.
There is a toggle, but it's not for the theme. It's to like remove all the runnable. It's a presentation mode.
So along the lines of like when you're setting code that hadn't occurred to you, right? When you're building a project like this, you run into a lot of things, a lot of problems that you know you need to solve, right? You're like, okay, well now we need to do this thing, right? But like specifically when you got to security and some of these other things, how did you go about educating yourself on the things that you didn't know, right? Like the rumspell, like the unknown unknowns, right? Like when you get there, you're like, we need to make this more secure. Like, it's some very like concrete, good examples of this could be a problem. This is a way to go about it. How did you go about educating yourself on the right and wrong way to do that, and even what the problems were you were trying to solve to begin with?
Sure. So originally, it was just over HTTP. We had a simple application server that has there's a pseudo terminal called a library called node.js. And we're just interacting there, and we started issuing some system commands and realized, man, there's got to be a way to start to isolate this. And none of us had much experience with Docker containers, so part of it was just the desire to learn more about Docker, knowing that we could use that to hide security. And then we learned about the sandboxing using gvisor, which is a secure runtime that's configured on GCP. So, that's more or less the process, but I don't know if that.
No, it's okay. I was kind of curious how that discovery process went.
Yeah, partially it was a desire to want to interact and mess around with Docker since we didn't have any experience. So, yeah.
And actually, a small follow-up. How long were you guys working on this? It seems like a monumental.
It was about 3.5 months.
That's it. Wow.
Yeah, it was pretty full time.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
How many people?
3 of us.
Wow. Well done. I mean.
Thank you.
Would you still have used webhooks, knowing the challenges you faced when you were having to implement the webhook queue?
we had wanted to use, be able to interact and test webhook payloads from the very beginning, but left it as like a cherry on top, which ended up, it really wasn't as complex as any of us thought it would be, really. First, we implemented just a client-side API call feature where you can give an endpoint to an API, and then the React client just receives the payload and inserts it at the top of the notebook. And then it was kind of iterating on that, where we have a drop down and we say the client app provides your endpoint, and basically the dispatch server recognizes the notebook it belongs to. So there has to be a notebook that exists in order for it to receive webhook data. So if they haven't already saved, once we create a webhook endpoint, we save the notebook. And I don't know if that.
I was wondering if you would use just typical HTTP requests over webhooks.
Well, webhooks were just an additional feature just to be able to interact and test webhook data, since as a server-to-server communication, it's kind of a hard thing to start testing a webhook's payload unless you already have a system up and running. There are some solutions out there, but we thought, why not stick that in this project also?
All right, I think we got time for one more question.
I'm interested if you said you didn't like 3.5 months. What type of project management issues did you run into with only 3 of you working on this project?
It was pretty tough sometimes to decide what we wanted to really focus on, but we decided pretty early what the general MVP would look like. And these guys I worked with were awesome. Worked with fairly little, disagreement, but we had our Trello boards and met in the morning, and then we'd decide what we'd go and grind away at, and then call each other in, pair if need be. But yeah.
I think it's amazing you got 2 people to commit to something like this.
Yeah. No.
Thank you.
Oh yeah, thank you.
Awesome. Thank you everyone for coming out tonight. Couldn't figure out who was going to do the closing announcement. There's still beer in the fridge, and I believe there's still some pieces of pizza straggling around, so feel free to hang out, nerd out. Thank you.
Thank you.